Hello, and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. How about that midnight reveal, am I right? Actually, I wouldn't know. I recorded this episode like 12 days ago, so I haven't seen it yet. Anyway, it's been 13 episodes since I ranked the Legion dungeons, so it's time to move on to Warlords of Draenor. Sadly, this expansion only introduced us to 8 of them, the lowest count of any expansion. I'm sure some of this is due to them pulling back resources on WoD to give Legion their all, but I suspect another large factor was this was just at the tail end of a downward trend of dungeon relevance. Over time, they had increasingly become just a thing you do at the start of an expansion to get pre-raid gear, and possibly steamroll later for Valor or something. This trend would reverse in Legion with the introduction of M+, which has become more and more relevant with every expansion. That being said, WoD, along with MoP, did give us challenge mode dungeons, which were a spiritual precursor to M+. There was only one difficulty level, your gear scaled down other than gem sockets, and the rewards were just cosmetics that you earned one time, which basically meant nobody had any interest whatsoever in doing them, at least in my experience. I did want the rewards, and since nobody else was going to bother, I became sort of the de facto leader of the activity for the friends and guildies I did manage to convince to participate. So in that sense, you could consider me uniquely qualified to comment on these dungeons compared to other expansions. You shouldn't, because that was over a decade ago and I've mostly forgotten everything, but you could. So let's stop dilly-dallying and get into it already. Ironically, bringing up the bottom in 8th place, we have Skyreach. I don't hate this place or anything, so that's a good sign for the list as a whole, but something about it always makes me go, when I have to run it. Spires of Iraq and the Arakoa in general are some of my least favorite parts of WoD. It all just feels kind of arid and dirty and full of disease-carrying birds. I think there may have also been an element of disappointment at play here. Throughout the Spires questing, it keeps getting emphasized how there's essentially a caste system between the High Arakoa and the deformed outcasts that they betrayed and cast them down. And part of that hierarchy involved mention of Skyreach, this glorious city amidst the clouds that the High Arakoa dwelled in which the outcasts no longer had access to. But the actual dungeon is basically a couple of platforms attached to a small mountain. That realistically is maybe like 12 stories tall. We have tons of buildings in our world taller than it, and this place is certainly not in the clouds. So I kind of figured we were still missing something and would get a raid that was in the clouds. But nah, nothing on that front either. As for the actual gameplay, it's fine enough. The trash to the first boss could be a bit rough, and I in particular hated those little solar familiar ads that would blind you. All of the bosses are fine enough in my opinion, none with annoying mechanics or that induced anxiety. The third boss, Rukron, could spiral out of control if your group wasn't careful about where it killed the Phoenix ads. Probably the most memorable part of the dungeon came just after him with the wind tunnel that tried to blow you back while little birds dove at you. This wasn't so bad for the person out in front, but because they would trigger all the birds, whoever was just behind them would either need to hold up or get pecked at. Of course, as a mage, I had a potentially great tool for dealing with it, as I could blink at the right spot and skip the entire inner circle, even if I was slow for the rest of the tunnel. But if I aimed it even slightly wrong, then the entire thing just kinda sucked. Fortunately, I think it deactivated once you pulled the next trash. It's certainly not the worst puzzle section in a dungeon either way. All in all, while I do like the dungeon, at the same time, Chugging in at 7th place, we have Grimrail Depot. Now, this is going to be a dicey ranking. Grimrail is a divisive dungeon. I have found that most people rather love it, and if you don't love it, you probably despise it. I actually consider myself sort of in the middle of the road here. I love the idea of a whole dungeon that takes place on a train. I love trains. I grew up watching Thomas the Tank Engine. I loved playing Turtles in Time on the SNES, which had a whole level where you fought in and on top of a train. Trains are really cool. But over a third of the dungeon isn't actually on the train. It's the same drawback that Mauve Souls unfortunately suffers from. The beginning is at the train station, and I know depot is literally in the name, but I'm just never going to love when a dungeon feels more like an event than a place. That, and I have major gripes with the second boss, Nitrog. He's just an extremely annoying fight. He jumps away and goes immune for most of the encounter. To make him vulnerable again, you have to use one of the turrets located on the side, but to use them, you need to fill them with ammunition dropped by adds. But only the boomers drop the homing shells you need. That's fine and all, except the turrets can also be loaded up to help kill the adds. Also, there are other adds that drop grenades that you can also use. Also, if you ever stand on the wing flaps, you experience a pushback effect. Also, the boss will pick a player and use suppressive fire on them, which they have to line of sight and make sure nobody else is in line of, unless of course everyone line of sights it. In actuality, it's not nearly as complicated as it all sounds, but it's still just too much. The dungeon already is a gimmick. You didn't need to layer a super gimmicky boss on top of that. But pretty much everything else about the place is awesome. If you've seen how the place actually looks from Haven's video, you'll know that you're actually on a static piece of terrain, and that what you're seeing of Gorgrond is actually what's being moved from front to back and then looped back up front. It's very clever. Though that brings me to my third and final complaint. Like with Skyreach, there's a bit of dissonance here. We know that the original version of Gorgrond was going to have a lot more train tracks, stretching all over, but the final version has barely any, so where exactly is this train supposed to be running? But yeah, despite my complaints, the core of the dungeon is actually very fun, and deserves a ton of praise. Just a short jaunt away, in 6th place, we have Everbloom. I know this one came back in Dragonflight, but I can't comment too much on that version. In WoD though, this place was crazy for all the potential skips. First off, you could finagle your way onto what is supposed to be the return path after defeating Witherbark. Also, on that return path, you could potentially jump onto a tree root and from there access the entire upper area of the dungeon. Also, when going right, you could sneak through the tree hut and climb the terrain to access the upper area as well. Some of these could be quite tricky depending on your group comp, and I know the place was repeatedly patched to try to combat all of the skips. I don't know if they ever worked or just made the actual skips more annoying, and I did find all of that interesting, but it doesn't actually say a lot about the quality of the dungeon itself. I'm mostly quite okay with it. Witherbark has a fun mechanic of wanting to place the dry plants in a way that they intercept the water globules, and you get more burn time on the boss while he rehydrates. The council fight is perfectly fine. Zeritak, the spider boss, was significantly more annoying, taking several minutes of trash waves before she becomes attackable. I remember dragging extra trash into her cave to kill at the same time, just because it was a lot of wasted time otherwise. I'm pretty sure in its Dragonflight return, you just didn't have to do her, which I actually don't like either. Just make the encounter better, don't ignore it. As for the Kirin Tor area, it was a nice change of pace, though I'm not a fan of when mobs spawn other mobs when they die. Sol was a fun enough boss that let you choose between letting her damage continue to grow, or to reset it but having to deal with additional mechanics. I don't think they needed to have us chase Yalnu into Stormwind, but it's a fairly minor portion of the instance, so whatever. And the fight itself is fairly fun. You're always kept busy, but seldom feel overwhelmed. Other than that, I guess the place does feel a little crowded, but this is very much a case where it should. The whole thing with the primals is how rampant and uncontrollable their growth can be. So while by no means my favorite WoD dungeon, I don't have much to complain about either. And in 5th place, we have Upper Blackrock Spire. This was the only revamped dungeon given to us in Warlords of Draenor, and though not perfect, I feel like overall they did a pretty dang good job of it. Ubers was fortunately very easy for them to chop off from Lower Blackrock Spire and to make a separate instance. And frankly, them occupying the same instance was always a bit weird. One was clearly targeted as a near level cap 5-person dungeon, and the other was like a 15-player raid. It was a very clear relic of vanilla dungeon and raid design, so I have no real qualms with them changing that. And though it was definitely the most intimidating of WoD dungeons due to its sheer length, it actually wasn't that bad, even in challenge mode. The first boss could be a little scary as you had to drop down to deactivate the conduit thingies, but had to make sure not to be caught by the fast moving sparks. I do think it's a little bit of a shame that the Rookery no longer operates as it used to, and that Ren Blackhand and his chromatic Drake Gith were replaced as the third boss by a generic Orc and Rylak. I don't think there was any pivotal lore that demanded that Ren had to die in vanilla. Or, if so, they could have used his brother Maim, who I think just kind of faded into obscurity even though they were co-leaders of the Blacktooth Grin clan. It's a minor gripe, really. Interestingly, you can still see the raid portal to Blackwing Lair, even if the path is gated off, so we have another relic of vanilla. It does feel a bit weird to me that the Beast's room and his son are kind of optional and mostly just there to get Leroy Jenkins as a garrison follower. But pushing forward, the fourth boss, Ragewing, is a very satisfying bridge boss that emphasizes positioning, and I'm still disappointed that we can't unlock him as a mount. Warlord Zayla is a great final boss. Frankly, she's just about at the perfect spot for how significant dungeon bosses should be, in my opinion. Someone we can recognize, but not someone who will be disappointed it wasn't a raid boss. We met her in Kata, help her seize control of the Dragonmaw clan, then see her align herself with Garrosh, fought us atop Galacross in the Siege of Orgrimmar, then escaped and helped Garrosh to escape. Her boss arena makes very clever use of Blackrock Mountain itself, and the fight is fairly well done, with you needing to kite her Cyclone and dodge the Proto-Drake breaths. Again, I have my little nitpicks, but I think the revamp was an overall improvement, and a pretty satisfying one at that. Not much felt like it was taken away, but a lot was gained. Next up, in fourth place, we have Shadowmoon Burial Grounds. This is just a very well put together dungeon. It being void focused and purple really helps set it apart from the rest of WoD's dungeon pool. Though the dungeon itself is linear, it at least has an interesting layout and a decent mixture of trash packs. I also distinctly remember there being 2 points where you can skip forward using a Darkmoon seesaw or similar toys, over the ledge before the first boss, and to drop down into the water before the third boss. Not that I particularly minded the sections that you wound up skipping, that was just the play. The first boss is easy enough, just bait the daggers away and stand on the runes at the right time. The second boss is similar to the last boss of Ahn'kahet, where everyone gets sent to their own spectral phase, but this one just felt less buggy. I love Bone Maw and his whole cave, although the flying mobs could be a bit bothersome. He's a fun fight though. His suck could be rough, but was easily countered with the puddles. Ner'zhul's arena is very cool, even if it's technically separated from the rest of the dungeon. For whatever reason, I do enjoy these destructible wall mechanics, where you need to clear a path to pass through safely. And I believe that's going to be a mechanic on the Lumathar boss in Manaforge Omega, so that's cool. Really, there's nothing about the burial grounds that I hate. My only real complaint has nothing to do with the dungeon itself, and more to do with the treatment of Ner'zhul as a character. Despite being the Lich King and fusing with Arthas, he was completely ignored in Wrath, because, as the novels would reveal, Arthas just dominated him in a mental battle. He wouldn't really be acknowledged again until we fight his remnant in Sanctum of Domination. And here, the AU version is the first of the warlords to fall, in a dungeon, after basically being bullied into joining the Iron Horde. It's just a bit sad. Great dungeon though. In third place, we have Auchindoun. This dungeon is in a peculiar position because it is serving as the Draenor equivalent of 4 TBC dungeons, and the outdoor space constituting Auchindoun. But the Burning Crusades version was kind of imploded by Murmur's summoning and then occupied by 4 different factions, so despite being the same place, they're not really the same at all. The Auchindoun dungeon itself is absolutely gorgeous. Despite being entirely indoors, everything is very well lit and spacious. The trash is fairly varied, with none of it being particularly annoying. Most groups have just 1 or 2 mobs that you really need to keep an eye on. The trash leading to Azakel is probably the most delicate, with you needing to keep a whole group of imps interrupted, though that's probably far easier with modern kits. And there's that one abyssal that crashes in, kills some Draenei with the impact, and that you have to then kite around. And I appreciate how the trash to Tarangor represents the 3 grimoires that warlocks had access to at the time. The bosses are all pretty enjoyable, and Soulbinder Nyami is an entertaining enough villain. Tarangor is an interesting case because of all the different forms we fought him as. A first generation Death Knight back in TBC, a warlock here, and a giant soul-eating demon thing in HFC. I haven't played Warcraft 2 yet, but I imagine that may influence how I feel about how he's been used in WoW. I suppose if I had to find some faults, I could point to how, outside of the challenge mode, you had that RP section at the start that made you run through the initial hallway an extra time, or that Terrangor and his trash are only accessible through teleporters. But that's really it. All in all, a very comfy dungeon that I'm always happy to see. Our runner-up for this list is Iron Docks, and I adore Iron Docks. It's honestly just a whole lot of fun. I could see the color palette being dull in another context, but I think it being set next to the water just makes it work very well here. The trash to the first boss can be a bit tight, especially with there being patrols, but there's nothing too crazy. Probably the bizarrest part of the place is how much space is dedicated to deploying 3 Iron Stars and completely killing / skipping all of the trash in that area. You then need to advance to the Council boss while hiding behind cargo crates in between rounds of fire from the last boss. It sounds tricky, but it's honestly pretty straightforward. The Council fight is pretty fun too. The trash to the third boss throws you a nice bit of variety with different captive animals thrown in, a theme that continues into the boss itself. And the final encounter against AU Skullock, the son of AU Gruul, is fine. I mean, you get knocked back and then need to either dive from crate to crate or just cheese it to end the cannon fire right away. I'll be honest, a huge draw of this place is just the banter between the 2 orcs that accompany Skullock, Koramar and Zogosh. They're just an absolute delight to listen to. That is what I do, Zogosh. I think good. Put a muzzle on it. Good idea, sir. I didn't mean the cat. It's great, and really helps break up what could potentially be some of the more lengthy stretches of the dungeon. And that's about all I have to say about the place. It just does everything right and nothing wrong. Hard to comment further. But edging even that out, in first place, we have Bloodmaw Slag Mines. This place is phenomenal. It just feels really cozy to me, you know? Probably from the magma and other orange hues giving it a sense of warmth. I mean, I realize there's slavery and stuff going on, but still. It's also one of only 2 WoD dungeons that gives you any choice in boss order whatsoever, and it does it far better than the other one, Everbloom, which still encouraged a certain order. Granted, I've never been in a group that went left first, but you absolutely could. I think the left trash to the third boss is just preferred over the right trash, though that's a bit of a shame because variety is the spice of life. Speaking of trash, this place has a lot of 2 to 4 target pulls, and I am super grateful for that. The game has drifted very hard into pull 20 mobs and AoE them all down territory, especially in M+, and I just don't get as much enjoyment out of that as other players do. I mean, my AoE damage usually isn't as good either, but even ignoring that, I prefer smaller pulls, and this place is all about that. Of course, you can still enjoy your AoE while running the gauntlet to Magma Lattice. I am not a fan of gauntlets, but it's fortunately not all that long of one. The bosses are all completely fine as well, though my favorite is without a doubt the third one, Roltall. He's the bridge boss of this place who will throw out fire patches, blow players back, and most importantly, roll 3 fiery boulders at the group that force you to dance around them as they roll down the bridge and then roll back. It really isn't hard, but dodging them successfully still feels satisfying. It's a simple enough fight, but between the dance and the setting, I just really enjoy it. Dungeons don't have to be completely bombastic to be great. A well-deserved win from the mines, in my opinion. So that's where I'd normally move on to talk about the art, but this time around, we actually kind of have an official popularity poll of the dungeons that we can compare to. This is because Shadowlands Season 4 gave us our first instance of an M+ dungeon pool, not just being all of the current X-Pack dungeons. Instead, we got the mega dungeons of the past 3 expansions, with the last 2 slots being chosen by a poll put out by Blizzard of all the WoD dungeons. Technically, it wasn't meant as a popularity poll, but that's pretty much how people treated it. Well then, I know I have good judgment. I know I have good taste. So I'm sure the results will be quite close to my own. Oh my. Well, NA and EU had very similar results, so that makes this easier to parse, but I guess not many people enjoy Bloodmaw Slag Mines. Shadowmoon Burial Grounds and Alkindune are also both down there in the bottom half. Grimrail is apparently everyone's favorite. At least we can all agree that Iron Docks is second best. I swear, I'm not deliberately being a contrarian. Remember, I chose Waycrest Manor for BFA. I'm a normal person. Yeah, and of course for this week's drawing, I went with the Bloodmaw Slag Mines. And as I mentioned earlier, my favorite part of the dungeon is the third boss Roltall, and the bridge he guards, which leads to the last section of the dungeon. And at first I was like, aw man, that's the loading screen, I can't just draw the loading screen. But it is not the loading screen. That actually depicts the far less sturdy bridge at the start of the dungeon. I don't have a ton to say about the drawing itself, because it is a mostly natural environment with very bulky components. It was a fairly quick job. Honestly, the trickiest part for me seemed to be getting the glow from the magma below to look decent. I don't know if I managed to achieve that, but I hope I did. Well, that wraps it up for this video. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye bye!